Well, welcome everyone. Are we set? Are we on? Can everyone hear our voices? That's great. I am just so delighted to welcome everybody to this very interesting and important and a little bit echoey space, but it'll be just fine. My name is Tina Smith, and I am the chair of the Destination Medical Center Corporation Board, and I am so pleased to welcome everybody to the first joint meeting of the EDA Board, the DMCC Board, and the City of Rochester City Council. And I would also just like to note and welcome representatives from Olmsted County who are also here today and very important partners. And I'm going to ask our colleague, Commissioner Jim Beer, to introduce his colleagues from the county.
Thank you. We have Richard Devlin, our county administrator, and we've got Stephanie Podolki, our board chair. And I saw Ken Brown. I don't see him right now. I know he's here someplace, but Ken Brown. Oh, there he is back there in the back. It's like church. You got to get here early if you want to sit in the back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beer. And I also want to just take this opportunity to welcome the other members of the public and civic and community leaders that are here today for this meeting, and ask your forbearance and apologies for turning my back to you. But it is me right here. In August of 2000, I'd just like to make a couple of welcoming and opening remarks. In August of 2013, these three organizations, the Mayo Clinic, represented by the EDA, our board, and the City of Rochester, launched the largest economic development project really in the history of Minnesota. This is a unique partnership with a mission that is focused on building and creating America's City for Health here in Rochester, to the benefit not only of Rochester, but also to all of southeastern Minnesota and really the entire state of Minnesota. The status of where we are today, of course, is that all three boards in April of 2015 approved a development plan, which is really our roadmap, our kind of guideposts for how we're going to achieve our goals for this project. And I'm happy to say that the market is responding to the direction that we are giving and the plans that we are laying out. Recently, we announced that we have officially certified, using the language of our governing statute, $152 million in private investment, and to date we think that we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million in additional private investment that is in various stages of planning and approvals and so forth. So I take this as a very strong signal that we are on the right track. However, we all know amongst our three boards that we have really important key issues facing us as we approach this, remembering that we are about 2.5 years into what we all know is ultimately going to be a 20-plus year investment in Minnesota. And I'd like to just say briefly that I think the key issues fall into a couple of areas, and they really form the outline for our agenda today. The first is, how do we marshal the resources to create a transportation system that this development district that will work for everybody, that will include and find ways of addressing the roughly 35,000 more people that we expect to come into the development district once we are completely built out. How do we accommodate and plan for and implement what we have all said is our goal of a 30% mode shift from cars to other modes of traveling around the district in order to make sure that this works? I would say that that is one of our key issues that we all three of our boards need to grapple with, and it is why it's the first thing on our agenda. But there are also other issues that we need to discuss and really think through together in this unique partnership. The second one I would offer to you is, how do we maximize the public investment that we have for maximum public value? $585 million, which is the total public investment amount that we expect to have, pending the private investment that, of course, comes first in this project. It seems like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But yet we all know in our various boards that even so there is a gap between the total capital investment in public infrastructure that we know is necessary and important to make this project work, and that amount of money that we have. So that's a key issue that I think our three boards need to grapple with, not just today, but in an ongoing way. And then the third thing is this is a complicated and interesting, complex public-private partnership. And one of the things that I've learned is that in that environment, it's always important to keep in mind what are our unique and individual roles and responsibilities as we tackle this. What is uniquely the role of the City of Rochester, uniquely the role of the EDA, and uniquely the role of this board. So I offer that as food for thought and as three initial kind of key issues that I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss today. I'm going to just ask Council President Randy Staver to say his welcoming remarks, and then also Jeff Bolton say his welcoming remarks on behalf of each of our boards. I'm going to formally convene the DMCC board. This is an official meeting of our board. Just also want to say that this agenda is packed. I'm going to do my best with the permission from the other two boards to keep us moving, and especially to make sure that there's plenty of time for our conversation, so that this does not, the great value of this will not only to get shared information, but also to have a shared discussion about the issues that face our three boards as we move this project forward. And I also just want to say a quick, huge thank you to the staff of the EDA and the City of Rochester and others who have helped to pull this meeting together today and make sure that this is productive and useful for all of us. So thanks very much to the folks sitting behind us right there who've done so much great work. And with that, I would be pleased to turn this over to Council President Staver.
All right. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Smith. What I'd like to do is just touch on three quick points in terms of my introductory comments as they relate to our DMC activities to date. First, I think it's important to understand that private investment leads our public investment. We're encouraged by the amount of activity that we've seen to date, the private investment, and we're very confident, in fact, that we will reach that $200 million threshold perhaps by the end of this calendar year. So it's something we're very proud of, and we're also very proud of the fact that the city, the county, and working relationships with the other boards, we've been able to take a lead in proposing and moving many of those projects forward. Second, I think we need to continue to be prudent with the allocation of the funds. The allocation of the DMC public funds, I think, is much more difficult than people think it is or assume that it is. We've often heard that there is a pot of money and people are just waiting for that to come to bear. And we all know that it's much more intricate than that and something that we need to pay attention to. I know that $585 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But the timing and the demands for those dollars are very significant, and the demands could very easily outstrip our available resources. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. It does create a challenge for the city and the two boards to be careful and very strategic in how we allocate those funds, and we need to be realistic about what we can accomplish. We also have some outside factors that are influencing some of our activities. The recent action or inaction of the legislative session has impact at the local level. We're going to talk about transportation today, and we're going to talk about, in Rochester and southeast Minnesota, the importance of an international airport, and that is a key component of our transportation strategy. So I am very hopeful and would hope that our legislators and the governor's office are heeding the populace of the state of Minnesota and would indeed hopefully take some action on that transportation project as well as many others that are influencing our communities statewide. Finally, I think our goal is to continue to reinforce confidence in the initiative. We've seen high levels of private investment and a large and growing pipeline of projects and activities out there. And I think it's important that we manage the public expectations. as to what will happen and when. We've said this is a 20-year journey, and certainly people are expecting some early progress and early successes, and we're just trying to manage that. This is a long-term project. It's not a 3-year sprint. There will be multiple projects of different size and dimensions, and I think there are many that are underway that we can point to, many that are in the pipeline, and many more on the horizon. So I'm very encouraged and looking forward to the continued positive relationship we have working with the two boards, our county board colleagues, and the community at large. With that, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Bolton.
Thank you, Councilman President Staver and Madam Chair. First, on behalf of the EDA Board, I would like to thank the DMCC Board for convening these three bodies. I think this is an important moment in our history and a fantastic opportunity to really get us aligned, make sure that we're aligned in terms of our approach to this really critical project or initiative. I have just three very brief comments. One, I'd like to underscore Mayo Clinic's commitment to DMC. DMC in the broadest sense, really looking at the benefits to the entire community. Second, as Mayo is investing as a major part of the private investment associated with this initiative, we're investing in both our patient care activities as well as our academic. Recent announcements related to Discovery Square, which really kick off a major initiative to attract businesses, both mature and startup companies, to Rochester, Minnesota. It's really exciting. We feel that this will really serve as a significant accelerant to our ability to bring new solutions to our patients and really continue to solidify our position as a destination medical center on a global basis. And then the final observation is really that as we've become involved in this, EDA staff, Mayo Clinic, the recognition of the importance of collaboration between the city, the county, the state, community organizations to the success of this initiative. No one entity or organization will result in success. And I've said this in many forums, I'm not sure there's a place other than Rochester, Minnesota, where you could get the kind of alignment that I've seen within the community toward a vision. And it's a vision that includes DMC, but actually is well beyond DMC. And so for me, it's very exciting to be part of this and appreciative and look forward to this afternoon's discussions. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. So the first item on our agenda is it says on our agenda, snapshot of DMC projects and public and private investment. And our purpose here is just to give all three of our boards kind of a rapid fire reminder of where we are and where we are and where we've been. And I'm going to, I believe that we have Steve Fenvold and Lisa Clark who are going to take us through this. I expect that this will be maybe about a 10-minute discussion. And please don't hesitate to speak out, everyone, and even politely interrupt our presenters if you have a question that you'd like to ask.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. A greeting to all of the three groups as well. I'm just thrilled to have everybody together to have these discussions. So Steve Kvenvold, our city administrator, and I have chosen to do this presentation together, and it will be a stage setter for this board, for these three boards. So the first thing we thought we would do is just talk about the key milestones of DMC, just a bit of a history lesson. If you recall, we started in 2012 and 2013, and that's when we brought the vision together. We worked with the community to create the DMC vision. We walked through the legislation in 2013. Both the DMCC board and the DMC EDA boards were established So I would consider that the visioning, planning, governance phase of DMC. And of course, the most important part was the DMC passed Minnesota legislation. So that's where we started. That was our roots, if you will. 2014 was a very important year. It was, I would say, that was the creation of the DMC development plan, which is serving us well right now. That's when the vetting of the plan happened. It was a massive undertaking. And there was a lot of community engagement at that point, and you'll see the blue bar at the bottom is we've tried to keep community, regional, state, and to a degree, and certainly more now, national engagement, so that people are advocates for us, partners for us, and develop or involved in this process as we go. So the development plan came forward. And in 2015, the development plan was actually approved. So 1 short year ago, our development plan was approved or endorsed, and the DMC district boundary was established at that time as well. Our first DMC authorized expenditures of public funds were issued in 2015. The DMC EDA's office was established about this exact time last year. And as Tina mentioned earlier, $152 million in total private investment was captured up to 2015. 2016 and 2017, this is the work that we have ahead of us. And so we're working very hard on these strategies and these business strategies, Discovery Square, heart of the city, and transportation, of course, being our priority areas. We've got activity in St. Mary's Place. We established a new development process that we are now engaging in, and it's the city and EDA are working together to make sure that this is an efficient, effective process and also a user-friendly process. And we're developing, or we're adjusting that as we go. And then we believe at the end of this year, 2016, we will have reached the $200 million threshold, which unlocks some of the state dollars. So it's a very quick glimpse of where we've been and a display of progress. And Steve and I were going to talk, the next slide we were going to talk about was really about the project review. Last month, President Staver shared specifics about most of these projects. But what Steve and I wanted you to see, and I'll ask Steve to walk through a couple of the projects to give you a glimpse of those, is the activity that's actually happening in the DMC district. There's a lot of activity, a lot of momentum, a lot of progress going on in all of the districts, all the 6 sub-districts of DMC. And you'll see it, sort of the clustering effect going on in the heart of the city in Discovery Square. And I actually think that's quite positive in terms of these projects because those are our priority areas. So I thought, Steve, maybe you'd want to talk about a couple of the projects.
As you can see, we've had a lot of activity in the last couple of years in the DMC area, and the city staff and the EDA staff are working on a number of initiatives at the current time. I'm not going to go into any detail on any of these specific projects, although I will commit to you that with the city staff and EDA staff, within the next week or two, we'll provide you with an update on all of these particular projects and what their cost is, what the elements are, what public assistance has been provided, what the status of them is, what the next steps on any of them are. And as I indicated to some DMC board members recently, is that we're going to be trying to provide you with periodic updates so you know what's going on with each one of these projects as much as we can keep you up to date. And then also we have a number of discussions about other possible developments, and as much as possible with, some of the people want to keep this stuff private until they bring it forth, but as much as possible, I'd like to inform all of these board members of any of the interest that we have in certain of our areas in the downtown.
I have a question, maybe direct towards the City Council. Can you give us, our other 2 boards, some sense of how this pace of development in these projects compares to what you were experiencing in Rochester before we started this project?
Well, I would say that it's really not, in certain respects, not all that unusual. We've seen, and we're very accustomed to, substantial growth in our community. The complexion of the sorts of development we're seeing is certainly different, and I think we're much more attentive to some of the details. the more comprehensive details. It's not just a building. We worry or are more concerned about the aesthetics and the public amenities and some of those features that go into the project. So overall, it's not that different from what we've seen in decades gone by, but on the other hand, I think we're much more attentive to some of the details and how it weaves into the overall fabric of what we're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Wojcik. And maybe I should have asked everybody to introduce themselves before we started. I didn't even think of that.
We're all friends here.
Okay.
We're good. I would just comment that many of these projects that you see listed up here were projects before there was a DMC development plan approved. So this is a continuation of the development that we've seen a long time.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on this? Oh, sorry. Councilwoman Mean?
Sure. I think the magnitude of this is just pretty awesome. And the staff and the collaboration that we've had has been just tremendous. And I can't thank you all enough for the work and the expertise that you bring. The other thing that I think is really different for me is that there's a lot of focus on the urban environment and having it very, very inclusive and looking out for the people that supported the DMC initiative initially anyway. The housing is critically important. We did have some conversation, and we'll continue to have more on this inclusionary housing. And even though it may not be the most popular subject at this point in time, I think it's very, very important that we keep that at a high level and be able to respond why or why not inclusionary housing is not something that we'd want to be involved in. I have a very strong passion that we don't have a concentration of affordable housing. I think we need to integrate it. And I'll continue to say that and hope the outcome will be one that I will be proud of and that this whole city, county, DMC, DA will be proud of. So I'm excited about it and looking forward to those updates that Mr. Quinbold will be providing to all of you.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Ruska.
I don't want to disagree a lot, but I think there's, in my eyes, and I've been on the council for a lot of years, I see a higher level of speculation in our community, more people engaged, more people aware of what's moving forward. And I think, and this is in all levels, but particularly in the downtown corridor, seems like there's a lot more going on. We've had things in the past, but it's kind of been at a steady, slow pace, and I think it's picked up quite a bit. A lot of people that I haven't heard from, and a lot of projects coming forward, a lot of ideas that I've seen. The pace just seems to be a little heavier and a little more exciting from a lot of people's views. So just throw that out.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
A comment. I do have the dubious distinction of being involved with the city of Rochester for the past 46 years. I've seen a considerable change in that period of time. And the DMC initiative has obviously, in my mind, accelerated the interest in the development of the community. And obviously the importance of the Mayo Clinic is really I think incentivized a lot of people to come in and try to associate themselves with the Mayo Clinic and the growth that they anticipate that will occur over that time. And we are seeing a larger scale of development perhaps in projects than we experienced before we had the DMC initiative.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments on this, our purpose here was just to kind of give people a sense of the lay of the land. I think I'd like to turn the agenda then to the transportation topic. And you'll see, colleagues, that we have sort of two big key issues on our agenda, transportation and the public investment. And I'm going to try to keep each section of this discussion to about 50 minutes or so to keep our agenda within bounds. So we'll do the best we can with that. Oh, here we go. Okay. Please, why don't you welcome and introduce yourself, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Richard Freeze. I'm Director of Public Works and City Engineer for the City of Rochester, and I'm going to be leading off the discussion today about transportation. As it was pointed out in the DMC plan, a sustainable transportation system will play a very critical role in urban development and redevelopment in Rochester, and it will provide access for healthcare, education, retail markets, recreation, and other key services. So from our perspective, it's very critical to the success of the DMC vision that there be a strategic plan for implementing integrated and coordinated transportation and transit systems. We are here today to lay out that strategic plan for you. And I want to mention something that maybe not many of you are aware of, and I'll ask Mayor Brady to comment on this too, but Mayor Brady is a member of the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies Executive Board. And in the recent months or so, last couple of months, the board has been talking about the DMC project. And they've been talking about it from the perspective that they feel that this is such a unique project, such a unique adventure that we're about to take here, particularly as it relates to the modal shift that's been spelled out in the downtown master plan and the DMC plan, that the CTS has made a commitment that they're going to continue to work with us and provide assistance to us and provide opportunities for research gathering on so that we can be successful. So they're very much interested in this, and Mayor, if you have anything further to add on that?
Thank you very much. Yes, when I was first asked to join that board, I thought, well, that'll be good. You know, I always think back on another board, the Regional Council of Mayors, when Mayor Ryback was there. I would every once in a while say, you know, it's more than 13 counties or so, or 14, whatever it is. We've got this other county down there that has a little clinic in it that maybe we should be talking about that a little bit. And RT would always make the comment, yes, we shouldn't laugh about that. We should be connected. And so to some degree, when it was the mayor of Edina, Jim Hovland, that was on the CTS, that Center for Transit Studies, and I don't know if they had a term limit, but then I was asked, when he had to step down, I was asked to be on there. But at first I thought, well, I'm there and gained a lot of great information, and we've been able to do some things with our transit system, with what kind of buses we've got. We obviously talk about our international airport, and then this came up too about all the transit issues that we have, and so it's been a valuable thing for me to be there and to represent the city, and to know that you've got a pretty broad group of people there that have lots of expertise and experiences in transit. And so I think it did pique some interest, and so the subgroup was meeting on it, and whether they could do some, maybe not so much research, but do some, what lessons have we learned with different things that may be valuable, and I think will be valuable as we go through the process as well. So it's been a joy to be a part of that group as well, and having somewhat of a relationship with the University of Minnesota, that's always good as well.
Maybe while they're pulling the...
Oh, there we go.
Oh, this is great. I'm glad you have these principles here. And I want to just also acknowledge that I'm hoping as we're going through this, we'll be able to really kind of hone in on some key questions, including not only what is a transportation plan and deliverables, but also, how can we move on transportation strategies in the short term, where we're also making a long-term plan, especially a long-term plan that fits with the federal process for transportation, and especially how can we leverage partnerships, public-private partnerships, looking always for other sources of funding in order to build out this infrastructure that we know is going to be absolutely essential to getting this project realized.
So on the screen in front of you and in your packet are the transportation principles right out of the DMC plan. It's in Chapter 7. It's one of the first pages there, and these are synthesized here for your review. These are the principles under which we are operating. These have been laid out in the plan, and these are the principles that we're following as we go forward. So what we're proposing for your consideration, and particularly the City Council consideration on July 6th, will be 4 major studies that are listed here: the Downtown Transit Circulator and Operations Study, the Street Use and Operations Study, the Parking and Travel Demand Management Study, and the City Loop Study. Again, all of these are laid out in the DMC plan. We've identified them, and we've been going through a process now of putting together a scope of work and a budget and selecting a team of experts from around the country to help us accomplish this task. So where are we in implementing the projects? We're at the point now where we've solicited proposals, we've reviewed those, we've selected team members that we feel are the most qualified in their respective fields to help us in these 4 areas. And the council will be asked on July 6th to approve an amendment to a contract with our program management consultant, SRF, to retain these individuals and firms to assist us in moving forward to completing these studies. Why are we doing this? Well, there's additional information in your packet that I don't, you may not be able to read the interconnecting circles on the right side here, but the plan, the DMC plan, basically went through a needs and concept development phase. Where we are now is that we need to look at full alternatives assessments and the concept design and environmental review. We need to get to that, what I kind of call second base now. We're at first base, we got on base, we got a hit, we were successful in getting the legislation, as Lisa mentioned, and basically we'll talk about here a little bit later today, the financing plan, but we're ready to go, and the next step is to do a full assessment of the studies. The purpose of the studies will be to refine the work that was completed in the DMC visioning process. It was a high-level look at what might be feasible. We'll call it kind of a feasibility report. Now we need to get down and look at the details that are necessary allow us to continue as we look forward to the opportunity for funding match both from the federal and the state government. There's certain processes that we need to follow to make ourselves eligible for those funds, and so we need to do that from the beginning now as we start evaluating alternatives. And that is one of the primary requirements of federal and state matching funds, is you must go through a comprehensive review of alternatives, screening them down to viable alternatives, and then more detailed exploration of those. So we'll be working to kind of reshape the envisioned recommendations of the DMC to basically make sure that they're consistent with all of the other things that are going on in the community, the comp plan update and other things, but they will also position us again to look for partners to help us in funding the improvements. The studies will advance the overall transportation program to a point where working on developing individual projects can proceed. People are waiting for us to break ground on something. We're excited about that opportunity too. There may be some things that we can do and identify here in the next 6 months or so that would give us that opportunity come spring of 2017. But we are ready to go. We just need to, again, get to second base, and that's kind of where we're headed today in our discussion. And as we look at the overall project cost, and the DMC plan had an aspirational level of funding that was rather daunting in some people's eyes, of $1.8 billion of DMC investment and $538 million of investment just in transportation. Whether we get there or not is not for discussion today, but we need to have a plan on how we're going to go about doing this. And again, as we're going to be pointing out today, this planning refinement and policy guidance that we're going to be going through is going to cost some money for us to do that, in the form of, we figure about 1% to 2% of the overall project cost will be necessary for to complete this phase of the work.
Welcome, Mr. Newman.
Chairman.
Yes, please. Yeah.
and members.
Mr. Doherty has a question for Mr. Freeze.
You don't have to leave. I don't want to chase you. Timetable. You said to do if you look at it, to be prepared to adequately do the applications for state and federal funds. Realistically, what's that timetable from today?
I could answer that question right now, or I could ask you to wait for about 25 minutes, and I have a
Could
lot
you give
more.
it to me now?
I can. It's about a year. It's about 12 months.
About 12 months.
Yep.
And you'll be ready to go then.
We'll have a lot more information right now that will be to a preferred alternative on almost all of these studies.
Could you keep us informed of how you're doing on that 12-month timetable?
As often as you would like to hear from us, we'll be glad to come in and give you an update.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, while
Yeah, please.
Gary's coming up, not for Mr. Freeze, but I'd just like you to note that some of the sources of funding is coming from Olmsted County. That's our share, the $3 million a year, and we're glad to help out our city brothers to help them plan for transportation.
Chairman Smith and others, I'll address that too briefly. Some of the costs are going to exceed kind of our annual funding, and we have a $3 million per year commitment that we've requested from the county. I believe they're willing to provide that. They're going to talk about it at their July 12th meeting, but that would be $3 million for 2017, $3 million for 2018, and $3 million for 2019. Even with those, there'll be some excess costs, and the city will then have to figure out what the other funding sources for those are, and I think we've been able to do that so far, and I believe we'll be successful in doing that again. So I thought I'd address that consistent with what Jim's comment is, that they're going to be coming in to be a big player and big partner for us at the rate of $3 million a year, which we really do appreciate. They'll be in advance of the state funding, just the way the city is. So my comments here, I just wanted to, this was information that the council's aware of. I just wanted to remind the city council and the rest of you kind of what we did adopt in the plan. And basically down the left side, it's a framework, it's a guideline, it's a work plan for the ongoing efforts of the DMC, established a boundary, and it's a planned outline of planned public infrastructure and transportation programs. What it did not do, it's not a defined exact block by block changing of the zoning in Rochester. We obviously couldn't do that with the plan. We would have been changing almost probably 50% of the parcels in the downtown. So it's not prescriptive, it's a guideline, and we wanted to point that out. What's the next? Sorry. Oop. Oh, and then I did want to also mention that one of the findings that the city had during their public hearing, this is a slide from the city's public hearing when we adopted the plan. Under the legislation, the DMC submitted the plan to the city as a preliminary approval of the DMC board. The city then approved it, then it came back to the DMCC for final approval. One of the other things that we did in there is we did acknowledge findings that our planning commission made that said that basically these studies are needed to be done, and I'll read from the key thing from the planning department, and this was included in the city council's resolution. There's a lot of other things on the same topic, but to make it brief, these studies that are needed should include a transit street capacity system study, a downtown parking and park and ride needs study, a downtown access authority transportation management study, and a city loop cultural crescent study. So all of these studies were, the city staff had advised the city council of that, and that was included in the action that they took, that these studies would need to go forward and that we should start that process as soon as we could. And that's my only role in this one. Thank you.
So this is an engineering slide here. We've got to have a solid foundation for everything we do, and the solid foundation that we have here is the fact that we have we have a dedicated right-of-way in downtown. The unfortunate part is that it's not as wide as it's going to want to be in the future for all of the competing needs that we're going to realize that were actually envisioned in both the downtown master plan and the DMC plan. The 75-foot wide right-of-ways, the 100-foot wide right-of-ways are really going to challenge us to be able to accommodate all modes in all corridors. So recognizing that's a challenge from the beginning, we approach this from the standpoint that these 4 studies need to be integrated. I think we could sit down and look at them and say, well, yeah, you could probably start one sooner than this other one, and maybe this other one could come in about 6 months in and it would make sense. But for everybody to be on the same page from day one, we felt was very critical. So what we're representing in this slide is that we believe the best approach in these 4 studies is to integrate them from day one. Have all 4 projects begin, and the level of effort will vary over in each month depending on, again, which study is waiting for decisions from some other study. But we felt that that was a much better approach than doing them all independently and then trying to coordinate them and probably missing the opportunity to collaborate and to have some level of peer review that will occur as different consultants working on different teams here have the opportunity to interact with their peers all the way through the process. So it was a matter of either an integrated system or an uncoordinated system. It seemed rather obvious to us, and that's what we want to make sure that you understand, that we are approaching this as an integrated series of studies that will be done collaboratively and over the same timeline.
I'd just like to ask a question. Again, this could be for Mr. Freeze or for members of the City Council or anybody, but am I understanding this correctly, that by the time the transit circulation study is completed, that the City Council would have agreed on the kind of mode for that transit circulator and also kind of the basic route for it?
One comment, and Mr. Freeze can maybe expand on this. I think in our discussion, one of the things we've talked about is in some cases we don't have a great deal of certainty. So what we do want to adopt is an air of experimentation. There are ways that we could test, for example, circulator routes and so forth without necessarily committing to all of the substantial infrastructure that might require. We've seen that used in other communities. We think that's an approach that we can use here so that as we vet the various ideas, we'll have ways to sort of test it in real life before we actually make commitments and as we flesh out the details of the plans.
Okay, thank you.
So, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Charlie Ryder, and I'm the Principal Transportation Planner. I work out of the City-County Joint Planning Department. So my role here today is to talk a little bit and give you a little bit of background on each of the 4 individual studies. I don't want to obviously spend a lot of time given our tight time frame here, but just briefly, first of all, I have my statement at the top there. Kind of the way I'm thinking of this is that we have the DMC plan that was done, and that really established a vision for us as we're going forward. What these studies will help us do is actually look at how we advance that vision, actually execute that vision going forward. So the DMC plan itself, as I look at that, is an excellent example of what I would call a sub-area transportation study. We were focused on a compact downtown area, looking at what the future in terms of economic development, employment, and so on might be for that area, and what the transportation needs would be to support that growth. Looked at things like existing access and mobility issues, potential future issues given a certain level of growth and what that would be. Did a high level, as Richard said, a high level assessment of different strategies for addressing those transportation needs, and came up with a recommended concept for addressing those needs and providing for the future access and mobility, level of access and mobility that the district would need. So you saw this graphic on the right on a previous slide. Typically when we think of particularly infrastructure projects, there's about 7 steps that you typically have to go through from the concept to actually having a project done. The DMC plan took us through that first step of the needs and concept identification, and did a little bit of work in regards to the second circle, the alternatives analysis. But again, really looking at kind of a high level. Where we're going with the 4 studies is to address the second and third circles completely and actually do a little work in terms of the 4th circle. So going through a more complete alternatives analysis so that we have documentation that's sufficient to support federal and state funding requests, get into some actual design level concept design work, do environmental review work that again is needed to support federal and state funding. And for some of the infrastructure projects like street improvements, the circulator alternatives, there'll probably be some preliminary level of engineering work. Typically, when we think of engineering work, there's sort of levels like a 5% level, 30% level, 60% level that happen at the preliminary stage. So we will probably be getting some of that 5 to 10% level work done as part of these studies. At the bottom, kind of the 4, I think, sort of global things to keep in mind. What we hope to accomplish with this work is a full understanding of all the impacts, getting down from the level of thinking about it in terms of the district to actually thinking about it in terms of corridors and what's happening at property levels in terms of impact and answering those questions, and looking at possible mitigation needs. Looking more in depth at constructability and financial feasibility and getting answers about that. Getting to the point where rather than having costs that are sort of generalized costs based on typical, what's the cost to construct a mile of street or what's the typical cost for constructing a mile of a streetcar, actually getting in there and getting better cost about what it would cost to do that work in Rochester in these corridors. So get a better handle on that. And then really, because of all the different potential projects that are out there, which just in terms of transportation is probably on the order of 30 to 35 different projects potentially when you look through the plan, trying to get an understanding of coordination and phasing and what might have to precede something else and so on, because there's a lot of overlap in terms of the projects. So with that, we'll move and look at each of the studies real quickly. The information in your packet actually has a little bit more detail, but what we tried to do in these slides for each of the 4 studies is in the left column talk about what work was completed as part of the DMC study, and then the right column is what is kind of the key features of the work that's going to be completed in these upcoming studies. So for now, I'm just going to focus on the right-hand column, what's included in the work being proposed. In terms of the circulator, if I get my slides in order here. Again, the key thing is that we have to get to the level of detail when we look at alternatives, do things like ridership estimation, impact on street operations, get to a level of detail where it's sufficient to satisfy the requirements for a Federal Transit Administration process and grant. So that's at a lot greater level of detail that was done through the DMC plan. One of the big issues is, for example, with a circulator, particularly if it's an on-street system as opposed to an elevated system, we need to understand how the operation of a circulator is going to interface with the operation of general vehicular traffic in those corridors. So if we do things like operate the circulator in a mixed traffic environment, that's going to be different than operating the circulator on an exclusive lane in those corridors. So a lot higher level of detail there. Some of the other things with transit, if I think, and everybody probably agrees, the 2nd Street corridor is the likely logical location for circulator type service. That probably means that the city bus service and like the city bus hub, which is now on 2nd Street, probably has to move. So we'll be looking at potential locations for moving that. The DMC plan suggested moving that to 3rd and 4th Avenue west of the Gonda building. So there's some challenges there that we need to take a good look at with the parking activity that happens along those streets, the level of pedestrian activity. So that's going to be part of the study.
I'm sorry, I hesitate to interrupt you, but I want to just pause for a minute and check in with our board. I want to make sure we have some, I have great confidence that that the city and county staff collectively can put together the hows for these transit studies and get the right get the right questions answered in these transit studies. So if I could just pause for a minute and ask our colleagues around the table if you have questions or comments around at the policy level that you think it would be helpful to bring forward right now that might help to inform what happens in these transit studies, or otherwise are just important to bring forward so that we can have a policy discussion about how we move this forward. And so with that in mind, maybe Mayor Ryback, I don't know if Tom has anything to say, if I could just do that.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. First off, thank you, and this is helpful as we're going through it, but I do think it's important for us to tee up what are the policy issues here. As you just said, if second is the logical place, but it's not the determined place yet for something to be there, it strikes me that's an issue that we should drive super hard to get to closure on absolutely as quickly as possible, and then look at how we're going to use that to be the single disruptor of the current situation, which we can't possibly have this incredible growth with such a high percentage of people driving their cars in. So, the policy issues that to me are most important are, number one, what is going to get a Mayo employee to somehow park further away than they're currently parking now? And to me, that has to explore, there are only two things you can do, is you can make it faster or you can make the experience better. And faster is going to be darn hard. Better can involve climate control. That if the option of now where I'm closer to the clinic but I'm exposed to the elements in the middle of winter is replaced by I'm a little further away but I can get on a very fast way in, but I'm climate controlled all the way, then we're giving something compelling. Okay, so that begins to go to your second point of that chart there about in the options study. You really need to look at something that is comparable on speed to a car, but gives a climate advantage, or at least an experience advantage. That requires us to think very differently and have that options look at either above or below grade. And I think we need to, if those are viable, great, and if not, let's get them off the table right away. The second issue is, where are we trying to capture people on Civic Center Drive? To me, the issue is any person coming from the north should be captured on Civic Center Drive and not even brought onto Second, where we're trying to diminish traffic. So just as we're trying to disrupt that strategy of the person going closely, how do we disrupt that other piece of that? So those are a couple of the issues that come back to the tools that we need. If what I'm hearing is it's going to take a year to do a study, I get that, but I don't think the idea of, frankly, as I'm looking at this, I don't see what the disruptive strategy is. And unless we do something very, very different here, we're going to have something that you don't have in Rochester that you don't want, which is traffic jams, and something that we can't afford, which is a downtown dominated by parking ramps. So to me, how do we tee that up? And the final point is, in that mode shift that we look at, I think we've talked about streetcar and other things. I frankly don't think we have a city that models exactly what I see. I think the place I look most to, frankly, is Disneyland. And the idea that we have to look at other forms of transportation that circulate people very quickly. So those are a couple of the points I wanted to have us begin to figure out. How does that fit within all of this, and how do we?
Mr. Fisher, do you want to comment or respond to
Yes.
that? And then we can get some conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just also want to encourage us to recognize that we're also about to go through an enormous mode shift, which is driverless vehicles. And most of the transportation studies that I'm reading these days, they'll acknowledge it, they'll say it, and then they'll say, well, we don't know the impact, so we're going to go on and continue to build 20th century infrastructure. And we have got to recognize that everything we're putting in place today is going to be probably obsolete within about 2 decades. One of the biggest impacts impacts is going to be parking. So we can't find parking now, but in about 20 years, we won't need much parking. And so what do we do to sort of accommodate that major shift in mode? And so I just want to encourage all of these studies to recognize that that's coming, and that we have to start to plan for it now.
Madam Chair, could I just go to a detailed question on this, Tom? Because this whole driverless car and parking issue is in my mind different here than it is, say, in Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, where you have people, the large population there all the time doing that, the car becomes almost like an Uber. Right. And so you don't need these ramps. So what we need to do is to take that, but then look at the idea that part of this is people taking trips from airports down here, part of the time in different things. So there's the question is right, but it's a different strategy within this context.
Right, because there are a lot of people coming from rural areas into Rochester, and so the
they can't replicate the
the driverless car mobility service model doesn't work as well in rural areas. So it sets Rochester apart in some ways. Yeah.
Mr. Bolton, I'm wondering if you wanted to respond to this, not to put you, I'll put you on the spot. Or Chris or others about, how Mayo is looking at this, because, it's so important.
Well, our objective is really to tie our transportation and parking analyses that we're undergoing with the work that the city and the county are doing. I do have to agree strongly with Mayor Rybeck's and Tom Fisher's comments. We cannot continue to build parking garages downtown. As we talk about Discovery Square and building out 2 million square feet and the working population associated with that, if we assumed parking was going to be right next door to your office, we would not have a pedestrian-friendly downtown. And I think it's absolutely critical for us in downtown Rochester to have a pedestrian-friendly community. I think the challenge that Mayor Rybeck posed is, how do you get an employee that currently has a parking space that might be 100 yards from their office to be motivated to take a more public transit mode in a remote parking garage? I think that would be the ideation opportunity as part of this analysis.
I'll stop talking soon, but Madam Chair and Jeff, and people should know that the decision Mayo has made to limit the amount of parking in Discovery Square is game-changing for all of us, because by doing that, it allows the rest of it and sets a model. So that's a huge thing. So if I was a developer coming in here, I would say, boy, I can't wait to I'll build an office building as soon as I get a tenant. Well, a tenant could be actually parking, and usually that's what developers come to you with. They ask you to put a bunch of public money into all of the parking. But what if I was a developer who came here and I responded to an RFP from Mayo that said X number of our employees have agreed to park somewhere remotely if their experience was climate controlled, retail, they could pick up their groceries on the way home, whatever the sort of thing is. Then all of a sudden, responding to that RFP, it's very different. So the question is, and I don't want to put you on the spot on this, is if Mayo's parking needs could be moved to a slightly more remote, a cluster of them, and represented as an office tenant, all of a sudden that changes the development dynamic. This is not just a transit issue, it's a transit development dynamic, and we could set off, we could inspire the development community to respond to this in a very different way. So I do think one of the things to do would be to have a pretty engaged conversation with how far Mayo is willing to go into saying X amount of parking stalls at and when I say remote, I don't mean, Cannon Falls.
Byron.
I mean like 2nd and 52. Yeah. And then if somebody's proposing a development there, instead of us giving them tax increment, we could say, here's a tenant, and then not have to give public subsidy. So that's the kind of development transportation discussion. And so as you're doing these transit plans, we've got to get way out of the box on this to tie these things together.
Yeah. Council President Saver.
I'd just like to add a comment to maybe temper the conversation a little bit, and this is my opinion. It may not be shared by the entire council. I completely agree that we need to do things different than we do today. We cannot continue to accommodate the parking needs and so forth. I think we've got a wonderful variety of options. I personally am not prepared to go so far as to say that we could almost mandate in 20 years that we will not have vehicles or something of that nature. I think personally that stretches some of the realities that we face. It's just not endemic to U.S. society. We can have that as a goal. We can do some things to help mitigate some of our traffic needs and so forth. But again, I'm not quite as enthusiastic perhaps in terms of some of those long-term goals. Not that we shouldn't try, but yep.
No, thank you, Council President. And I just want to say that I always am grateful when we have a back and forth on these conversations, because if everybody is agreeing, then that probably means that nobody is agreeing. So, Nick, go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up, I think we all had a little briefing. The full alternatives assessment, I think, is critically important for everyone's engagement in the issue. With all the options that are out there, even being discussed today, until we really have some additional support information, I think it's a bit premature to begin self-selecting which ones you think are the best option. And I think I want to take that and I want to mix it with a little bit of a push here. I've seen and I've been in many situations where a plethora of alternatives leads to a refusal to set a direction. So I guess the challenge I think that we all face is pushing forward the decision points as far as possible to make sure we're committing, not before we have the information, but we're making a commitment, we're drawing a line, and we're setting direction instead of kind of letting these decisions languish. So what I kind of laid out here was, reducing the ability to delay decision points. And I think, even looking at this, and I've jumped ahead a little bit, the timelines for all these studies, I think it's important that we pinpoint exactly the point where we have completed what we deem to be the full alternatives assessment. That's the decision point. You have all the information, or you've identified lacking information, you do one more cycle and you make a decision. It cannot be this kind of prolonged decision point. The only other thing I'll add to some of the statements that have been made is the breadth of the impact that we're discussing cannot be overstated. The decisions that are happening with transit downtown will have an immediate and palpable impact on the rest of the community. So we can pick out 2nd Street, and it's a great tip of the spear decision to try and make that decision up front. But I also, everyone here represents a larger constituency, and I think what we continue to have to reinforce is the necessary studies have to be done so we can make sure that it's servicing all of Rochester, and we have to continue to kind of keep that as our focus. So I do appreciate it. I appreciate the work staff has done to draw up some of these timelines. I think my challenge to staff, again, identify when we've completed the necessary information and identify that decision point. Let's not let that languish. Let's not go without making the decision.
Commissioner Beer.
Thank you. I'm not a bright guy, but listening here is what we need to boil these things down to is, as I see it, and what I'm hearing is, developers want to know the rules. They don't really care what the rules are, but they want to know the rules, and they want to know that it's not going to change. So we need to push our staff to come up, we got to do studies. Everybody knows we need to do studies, but we can't go on forever. We need to get a decision point so that the developers know what the rules of the game are. They don't particularly, they do care what the rules are, but they just want to know what the rules are instead of a amorphous thing. That being said, my colleague Mayor Rybeck is true. To get people out of their cars, you got to have a Disneyland experience. I don't know what it is, but maybe they can turn in their grocery list when they come to work and their groceries are picked up waiting for them in their car. They drive their car and somebody throws them into their car. They got to have Wi-Fi. I don't know. I mean, but you got to have a reason. I know I do, to leave my car. I love my car. I mean, I love my wife, but I love my car really close to that. Well, you laugh, but it's true. So we got to really think about how we're going to get people out of their cars.
Giving
So,
leave your wife.
right, well, yeah. I don't know how to speak well. But anyways, so we need to think about, if we are serious about trying to get people to park remotely, and not in Cannon Falls, but nearby downtown Rochester, we got to have something that makes a kick that they are going to want to do it. And I don't know what that is. I'm not a smart enough guy, but we've got quite a job here to do, and we got to push.
I love my wife far more than I love my car, but I understand the point. But I do love my bicycle quite a bit, though. I do understand, though, that I do need my car, and I'm going to need my car for the foreseeable future. But one of the great things about the opportunity we have in front of us is it's about public investment and priorities. And if we put, $750 million into subsidizing parking, that's $750 million that doesn't go into transit or other priorities. So there is certainly a lot of motivation for me to find the best and more efficient ways to do it. And there's simple things that are low cost that are going to drive our future as well. If every lodging facility in Rochester was connected to frequent, reliable transit that could be integrated into the Mayo patient scheduling, we aren't going to have very many patients that are staying in lodging facilities that are going to be downtown. So I'm looking forward to some of the exciting opportunities that this will present to making it a more walkable, bikeable downtown and a functional, drivable downtown.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Bell.
I'm not a transportation expert by any means, but when we opened Target Field, prior to that, we did a study of our fans on all kinds of things. One of them was, how would you prefer to get to the ballpark? And we had all kinds of options, park as close as you possibly can, take a bicycle, go to a restaurant and walk, blah, blah. 40% said they wanted to take the light rail. I think getting people out of their cars may not be as difficult as you think.
I'm reminded, Jerry, as you say that we're all so aware of the studies that talk about young, one of the big challenges for DMC is to recruit and retain young people who are even more interested than all the rest of us in figuring out how to have options to driving. So I can see Tom shaking his head on that.
They love these much more than their cars.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. RT.
One of the things that's exciting when you get into these transportation discussions is that everything's out there. And one of the things that's complicated is there's so many options. So let's take this broad conversation, but let's also say that our real core challenge isn't quite as broad. Unlike most cities, what we have here is a very, very concentrated point source. What we also have is when you're looking at these transit issues, you build for peak. It's like you build a parking lot at Target for Christmas, not for the rest of the time. So let's really look at our core problem is commuters coming in to work at the Mayo Clinic. So we have a morning and an evening rush hour. If we control that, and if we take the existing magazine of parking and put a different management structure in place so it's used for short trips and not for daytime, then solving those two problems solves about 80% of what, and the rest of it becomes clear. So, and we're not even asking people to give up their cars. We're asking them to go about 4 blocks further, okay, maybe 6. So as mind-boggling as this gets to be, then take that. Now let's go back to the transportation study. I don't want to ask you to do this on the fly, but if we could take all of this work, but put those key questions into that, and broaden the options on it, then all of this is necessary for compliance and all of it, but we don't have to get as detailed into that. We know you guys know what you're doing. You have a great reputation. That's great. We just need those core questions asked. What's going to get a person commuting to the Mayo Clinic to park a few blocks further away? And what is going to allow us to manage our downtown parking differently? Those are really, to me, the 2 core questions.
Right.
Yeah. Mr. Doherty.
One of the things that, Jerry, you brought it to mind is to get people out of cars is economics.
That's right.
What do you charge? What do you charge downtown to park? Is there any charge downtown to park? In the Twin Cities, the closer you are to the heart of downtown, the higher your fee is. The further out you go, the less it is. And it's a great driver, and Mayor, I would assume you know that, to getting people to park out or getting them out of their car. I know at Jerry at the ballpark, you know, people come in their bikes, they come in the light rail because around the ballpark, 5, 6, 7 for an event, it's $20.
$20.
And,
Light rails too.
you know, and that gets people coming other modes of transportation. And I think, I don't know what you charge in Rochester in parking. I would suggest it's probably not very much. And if you can control prices. Jeff, you're smiling.
Because we don't charge our employees anything.
That's a significant employee benefit. I think Mr. Campbell, I think, has something to say, and then Mr. Bilderbach.
I just hope, Jeff, that you and the Mayo Clinic weigh into this issue in a very significant way, because they're your employees and they're your customers, your patients. And so strategically, I really want to know how you feel and how this fits in. And hopefully everyone else of us around the table will listen to what you think is in the best interests of the Mayo Clinic.
How do you get them out of their cars?
Yeah.
Councilmember Bilderbach.
Thank you. I think it's important when you talk to people about what they're looking for. They're looking at a reliable system, and they're looking one that they can go in comfort. One of the things that make Mayo, and as a Mayo employee, people like to park off-site because they know the vehicles are going to be there. They have a schedule. The buses are there every 15 minutes, and that makes a big difference when you're asking people to ride. The other thing is comfort, as I said, and that fact is if you're asking people to come into downtown and take light transit or the other methods to get here, they have to be able to get on these vehicles and be able to carry packages or whatever they need to go back and forth. If they can't do that comfortably, they won't do it, and they won't ride it, regardless of how cheap you want to make it. They're going to still want to be able to get to their package, get to their destination in a period of time, and without a lot of hassle. So we need to make sure that in the transportation we set up, again, it's reliable, and there's a comfort factor that people know they can get on it, they can carry what they need to do without having to struggle.
Councilmember Means? Oh,
Well,
sorry, then I'll come back to Nancy. Oh,
am I?
did you get it?
Okay, I'll just speak. Just makes me smile. When I think about our transportation department, our engineers, Mr. Freeze as our grand leader, I'm one of your favorites, I know, because I'm such an expert on transportation. So, yes. But, you know, we have such experts here, such expertise. We have world-renowned experts that we can call on as consultant and try to get them more involved in partnering with us. I think as we're planning this, we talk about, you know, short-term, mid-term, long-term, and how innovative can we be? How do we shift our thinking to maybe consider that 20 years down the line, the use or lack of use of automobiles? And I don't think that should be discounted as we move forward. I had a call from my daughter, and we were talking, and I says, well, are you at work or are you in the car? Because I don't like talking with her in the car on her cell phone. She says, no, I'm using my watch. My phone is on my watch. This is a Fitbit. I don't have a watch, a phone on this one. And it reminded me of the Jetsons. And I'm going to go to the library and see if I can secure the Jetsons, because who would know that, you know, 40 years from now, someone was walking with their telephone on their arm and being able to speak and get responses. So I don't think we should exclude something very visionary as well and fold that into possibly a short, mid, long-term decision making.
One aspect of the DMC initiative is regarding wellness. And so I just hope that that aspect doesn't get lost in all of this planning. I realize our climate is not similar to Portland, Oregon, but aspects along those lines of the jobs that we create and the demographics we attract to Rochester, hopefully that will be incorporated as we think about transit broadly.
Thank you. Mayor Brady.
This is very interesting discussions, but I would add, first of all, in Rochester, within the city limits and beyond, we have a city bus line that thousands of people come in every day on that. And so transit systems, I know one of the phrases I heard at the CTS is talking about first mile and last mile. Is that so if you have a route, how do you get from that first mile, and then when you get to where you're going, that last mile, how do you get there? So all of that, our bus system, we know that we've got to expand that. It can't be just 7 to 6 Monday through Friday. There's hospitals, people work 24 hours a day. I mean, they don't all work 24 hours a day, but the service is there, other things. So we need to keep that in mind, but we have a pretty good bus system here as well. I may be too dense on the thing on driverless cars. There's still a car on the road, and where do you park them? There still is there's somebody in the car at some point, but so I don't understand how that's going to solve everything just because it's driverless. That's always one that I puzzle about. I happen to be one that still kind of is intrigued by what was first known as the PRT, Personal Rapid Transit. It's continuous, so it's even better than waiting for a shuttle bus to pick you up at a lot someplace. They're there all the time, and some say, well, that's not been tested yet. Well, I think it has some other places in the world. Mr. Bell, you mentioned, whenever I'm up there, my one daughter lives in St. Paul, and I get on the Green Line, and I get off practically at the gate, immediately at the gate at Target Field. So it works slick. Of course, I can park at her apartment. I don't pay anything then. And she's kind enough to pay my ticket for the light rail as well. So it works well. But anyway, I think we need to be really thinking about this. I just was at a session, they said, don't just think out of the box, think about a new box and a totally different one. So this is good discussion to have, but we need to solve that, or not solve it, but really start focusing in on what can we do and get moving on it. I know it's money too, but maybe there's going to be some grants available.
Madam Chair, if I could just respond, Mayor, GM and Ford are quickly buying or partnering with car sharing services, and so their future already is to move into the mobility service business rather than selling cars. They will sell us mobility, which means that the vehicles will be constantly in motion. It's more like an automated taxi service, and so the reason why parking becomes less obvious is that they make no money if their cars are sitting. So the only time parking will be necessary 20 years from now will be at night, in the middle of the night, when nobody's calling them up. The rest of the time, these vehicles are going to be continuously moving, and we will call up a car to take us where we want to go, and then that car will go on to its next call. So that's why a lot of transportation engineers are starting to see a very different future from the one we have now, because then we won't own cars. We will have mobility service contracts with Ford and General Motors, Toyota, Google, and Apple.
Yeah, Mayor Ryback?
I want to introduce just one other issue, which is how all of this impacts the kind of exciting nightlife, restaurant kind of community that we have. Any of us who've been here when the mail buses pull out recognize that a huge part of the vitality and the economic potential of this city goes goodbye at the same time. If this was a place where we weren't drawing people from such a big distance, there should be a philosophy about trying to look at, light rail or any other sorts of buses and stuff, but that's really not the issue here. The issue here, in fact, is really about getting people to slightly remote lots, and in fact, we want them to have flexibility because we want them to stay and spend money in the restaurants and the bars. So I think the focus, while can be narrow, I don't think we're necessarily trying to get people out of their cars, although everyone who does. When my brother-in-law took the bus to the clinic, it was one less car. That's great, but he had to go home at a certain time, and that is different. So I just think if the more we can get really surgical on this issue of getting people in cars to be a few blocks further, that to me is the single biggest issue. We change that and everything else gets it. So I want us to have a really broad box, as you were saying, Mayor, on that one. But I think if we try to boil the ocean on this thing, we won't surgically attack the core issue that we've got right here.
Yes, Mr. Ruska.
I just want to tag on to what Mr. Bell said earlier about the transit in their survey. One of the things about Target Field is it's used majority April through hopefully October, but you know that timeline, November, December, January, February, it isn't really used as much. And I think that a lot of the things that we've seen in our studies from our experts, they show these wonderful transit systems, but they have got palm trees in the background and things that aren't realistic. And climate is going to be a big deal to make sure that we're applying that to any of the processes we use. As an old bus rider, I used to have to sit outside, and you're sitting outside and that bus is 5 minutes late in January, you're not as excited to do it the next day. So if you can create that, make sure that we're incorporating our climate into this thought process so that when we give a final product, people are, as Mark kind of said earlier, comfortable when they're traveling, they're going to find it to be a lot more appealing. So let's keep that in mind as we're applying these thoughts.
Right. Well, I have now, all of us collectively have now thoroughly disrupted the excellent presentation that has been put together by city staff and county staff. And I hesitate to apologize, however, because I think that this has been a really good conversation. And I know that many of us got the transportation presentation yesterday, and I will admit that I have not had an opportunity to read it thoroughly myself, but I really strongly recommend that everybody, certainly the City Council, will be diving in deep on this, it sounds like in the next week or two. But for the rest of us, I think it's just really, really important for us to read this, because it helps also to helps us to understand the practical realities of what needs to go into the massive amount of planning that is really required to make sure that at the end of the day, the City Council, with our advice and counsel, makes the decisions that are going to be for the best of this, best of this entire project. In my attempt to keep us somewhat on time, I'm going to ask the gathered group if it is okay with you if we shift to the next item on our agenda, which has to do with the real brass tacks of how funding is going to flow. But I, for one, have a few takeaways from this conversation. The first is that there is a need, we all acknowledge that there's a need for big thinking about how we plan for a future that we can't completely anticipate, whether that's driverless cars or, you know, who knows what it might be. That there's a big policy question in front of all of us, which is how do we motivate a mode shift in this area, whether it's climate or economics or, you know, the importance of reliability in transit. And I also want to just say that there's conversation about how we disrupt the current state, but I want to do a very deep nod of respect to the City Council and also the county, because you guys are in fact the only ones in this room who represent the residents and have been elected by the residents of this community. So you are the ones that are going to have to find that balance between big vision and practicality and what truly will work for this community, not just within the district, but throughout the entire community. So that is why, in the end of the day, the city is the lead on this, and those of us, the rest of us, are here to make sure that our voices get heard too. Okay, thank you, and many, many thanks to city staff for this excellent presentation. Now, next we are going to be talking about what I know might seem like a dry subject, though I suspect the finance people around this table know that this is actually, in some ways, the entire conversation, which is how do we pay for all of this? And I'm really grateful for Lisa Clark and Gary Newman and Patrick and Dale Martinson and others who are going to be giving us sort of an explanation of how the finances for this work. Now, most of us have a pretty good sense of this, but we thought, I think this is going to be helpful to us as we figure out some key policy questions, which is how do we manage this project in with the timing of the funding flows as they work, and how do we address what we know are gaps between what we want to do and what we currently have the funding to do. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the respective boards, thank you. This agenda item and the materials associated with it are found in the tab marked Finances in your book, so you can choose to follow there as well. This agenda is described as finances, and it's to talk about the public funding streams, help us all better understand how those public funds become available, and to have a discussion about how we can leverage public funds for maximum public value. It's really that whole conversation that was had earlier about the need to be prudent in the use of resources and to really take advantage of the market response and the market energy that we're finding right now. Really the key takeaways from this presentation that we hope that we come away with is really that understanding of the resources available, an understanding from you about how to maximize those resources, how to take advantage of the market confidence, the market response that we are having, and recognize the leadership role that the city primarily and county have played in advancing public resources as we move this initiative forward. Again, remembering that it's really the private investment that is the catalyst for future public support. Just a quick outline of the table of contents. There are about a dozen slides or so that we're going to walk through. One is simply is really around just a reminder of the scope of the DMC initiative as it relates to the role of the state's commitment, complete understanding of the sources, including how they are triggered by private investment, and then understanding and exploring some opportunities to accelerate access to those public resources. So in addition to myself, you'll be hearing from Mitch Ablin, who is a member of the DMC EDA staff, and Gary Newman from City Administration, and perhaps Dale Martinson from City Finance. So with that, I'll turn it to you, Mitch.
Thanks, Patrick.
As Gary spoke about earlier, we just wanted to review what the DMC plan is and what it isn't. So a quick highlight that it is a framework. It's not a prescriptive block-by-block master plan. Before we get into the numbers, I want to share and remind people that the state's commitment is an investment. It's an investment in the city and community of Rochester. Once we reach that $200 million private investment threshold, as we expect to surpass that this calendar year, these state funds will kick in, that green arrow on the bottom, further spurring private investment and new jobs, which in the long term turns into new state taxes back to the state of Minnesota. So it's a true investment into this community. Starting looking into the sources, the graph on the right really tries to share the scale of private investment, the blue $5 billion number, hopefully more than that over the 20-year period, in relation to the $585 million of public investments. The yellow faded bar on the right is the hopeful federal and MnDOT grants that will help the transportation and other initiatives. And so we're just trying to keep that in scale as we go through this presentation, that it's really the private investment leading the public investment. Flipping to the next one, and actually if you flip those two that have copies, if you flip one more, it's got the full detail. But this one is the nice graph of breaking out the 585. So looking back, that green 585 is broken out into 5 portions. The state general aid of $327 million, state transit aid of $69 million, followed with a county transit aid of $46 million, City of Rochester at $128, and sales tax exemption at around $14 million. All of that adds up to the 585, and each one flows with its own formula, and those are listed in your packets for full detail.
Mitch, could you just remind us of the sales tax exemption? Remind us of what that is.
Yes, and I believe it is a sales tax exemption on true public works projects.
Construction?
Construction, public works construction projects. And so these 5 sources of public funds of the 585 each flow through their own formulas. And the largest portion, the blue portion, the state general aid, is based off of private investment occurring. So this next slide, estimated private investment pipeline, we wanted to walk through the private investment we've seen to date and our projection through the first phase, which is 2015 through 2019 of the 20-year plan. Up top in the yellow row is the July 2013 through December 2015 private investment of the $152.4 million. The middle section in green is our detailed 2016 projection as we see it today in a conservative estimation, with a total projected 2016 of around $150 million. Just below that in blue, the 3 years of 2017, 18, and 19, we're projecting each at a high level at around $150 million. Again, that's our best estimated guess at this time. What that results in, the gray row at the bottom, for phase 1, just over $750 million of private investment into this community in the next, over that 5-year span. So what does that mean? That $750 million, this green line on your next slide, it starts to unlock the state general aid and the state transit aid. This illustration is the state general aid, the blue $327 million portion on that graph earlier. So as private investment, the green line continues to happen. The small bars down on the bottom on the left graph are the state general aid, which has been blown up on the right so you can see it. And there's a 1-year lag. So in 2016, when we surpass $200 million, we will submit and certify that to deed in 2017. Once it's been certified, every dollar over $200 million at a rate of 2.75% will flow to the DMC initiative. The blue bar on the right at 2.8 is just that. And once deed certifies it, it locks that state commitment in each year through the 20-year initiative. So we would receive 2.8 in 2017, 18, and 19. As private,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is that locked in permanently?
Until the state funds are exhausted.
The legislature couldn't take it away.
What the
I want to answer that
legislature
question.
giveth, the legislature can take away.
Yes.
But
I mean, if they decided in their wisdom that they didn't like what we were doing, they could discontinue those payments even though they had been committed?
They would have to take legislative action, but I believe it is possible, but difficult.
Kathleen?
Madam Chair, this is an annual appropriation by the legislature, and so
Annual
although it's a
appropriation.
standing appropriation, the legislature could change its mind.
Got it.
It becomes more difficult if bonds are committed, if bonds are issued and the appropriation is pledged in part to the payment of those bonds, and so that's kind of an unknown.
How, in your opinion, how would the rating agencies look at that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
In your opinion, how would the rating agencies look at that?
The state appropriation can only be partially pledged to the bonds any bonds that the city issues, and so I would suspect that the rating agencies would be looking towards the creditworthiness of both the city and the state appropriation.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. So what that means is over time, the state general aid starts to stack up year by year. So you can see it goes from 2.8 to 7 to 11.1 in this projection, which results in just over $20 million in phase 1 of state general aid. So keeping that $20 million in mind of state general aid, we'll go to the next slide, which shows the availability of public funds over the 4 5-year phases, so the whole 20-year plan, trying to put it in perspective. So this $59.5 million is our projection of the portion of the $585 million that will become available in phase 1. $20 million of that is the state general aid. along with the City of Rochester and the Transit Aid, and we'll break that out on the next slide. But here we want to show in scale and proportion, the blue circles are public investment, which add up to 585 over the 20 years. The green circles at about a 10-to-1 ratio is the true private investment impact, 5 billion plus over the next 19, 20 years. So this $59–60 million of public funds that will become available over the next 3–4 years, if you flip forward, are represented in the graph on the left. As we just talked about, the state general aid will be around $20.9 million. The City of Rochester, through the quarter-cent sales tax, which will generate around $5.6 million a year for the next 4 years, will be around $22.4 million. The county transit aid, I believe it's $1.5 million this year and a commitment of $3 million a year going forward. With the state transit aid being similar, as it's a formula based off of private investment, but at a slightly lower percentage than the state general aid, rounds that out to around $60 million of available public funds over the next through 2019. The graph on the right shows what of these funds, what have already been spent or committed through a mixture of public project costs, planning, and operating budgets. And that total for the span of 2013 through 2019 is around $43 million, meaning that we have around $16 million available and uncommitted. This next slide breaks out of those funds that have been spent or committed in detail here, and I won't go through all the detail, but just wanted to remind that it's a split of project costs and admin costs, and over time, very quickly, the project cost portion of that will far outweigh the admin and operating costs. And in phase one, just always reminding the purple bar on the right there of $750 million is the private investments in almost scale to the smaller amounts of public funds. And with that, I'll hand it over to Patrick.
So we could pause for a moment to see if there are any questions about any of the data that Mitch presented, and really want to, from there, segue into the conversation, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions? Yes.
The $43.6 million that's noted on page 11 in our packet here, and it says committed uses. That includes the budgets of the organizations that are operating as projected?
Madam Chair, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
So with that, just wanted to say that a goal of this discussion really is guidance around how to take advantage of the opportunities that we're being presented in this marketplace, and the tools that we can use to help shape our decisions and recommendations. So this diagram is intended to say that there are some considerations. One, there are priority sub-districts and transportation that you've already identified as key and our priorities. So heart of the city, Discovery Square, and transportation. We also know, based on direction and policy guidance from these boards, that there are project types, if you will, things that matter to you, affordable housing, environmental, well building, those kinds of things that are project types, innovation and so forth, that would be priorities. And then really the third of these is the timing and availability of funds. And this is the conversation that we hope to tee up, and I'm going to ask Gary Newman from City Administration to help talk about opportunities or ideas that we've begun exploring around how to free up and accelerate access to the public resources. So with that, Gary.
You won't be able to read this, so I'll kind of give you a summary. Currently, the revenues that we have available for the DMC from the city side of the table is a quarter-cent sales tax we enacted January 1 of this year. Provides $5.6 million a year. It'll grow to about $8 million over to 2035. That'll bring in $136 million by the time we get to 2035. We've also discussed preliminarily a second revenue source, which is one we already have as a revenue source, not a new one, but we can dedicate it to the DMC, and that's we get $1 million a year in tax abatement, and from 20 to 2035, we could dedicate that with the approval of the council of the DMC. It's something that is in the legislation that gives us some opportunities in there for the DMC that would provide an additional $15 million. The annual revenues that we have to provide some kind of bonding match presently, we have an annual budget right now of about $4.2 million. It's been coming in a little less than that. I think in your audit today it was $3.6 million. We've got revenues of $5.6 million. We have $1.4 million available. You multiply that by 2.55 because the state matches us $2.55 for every dollar. And we think with that, if we need funds for early stage projects in phase one, we could borrow approximately $50 million that would be available for some of the early stage projects. With the abatement and some growth in the sales tax, we think down the road, you could potentially bond for an additional $47 million some years down the road. Obviously, the longer you postpone costs and the less borrowing you do, the less interest, and the more capacity you'd have for bonding. Down the road, so we're in good shape for phase one. We should have some additional resources for future years. Down the road, if this becomes an issue, we'll have to look at some other additional revenues. I mentioned the one on the abatement that we've talked about already. The county is considering a letter to us that'll they're providing $1.5 million in your budget this year for transit costs, and they've discussed having a letter they'll provide to you that would provide $3 million a year in 17, 18, and 19, and I think they're going to act on that at their meeting in July, and Jim's already commented on that. That will provide the match we need for some of these transportation studies and some other costs. The city may also have to do some additional funding in that arena. The county's funding will be in advance of the state funding, just as ours is, because the whole DMC thing is set up that the investments have to grow, and then the money comes in pretty large amounts later on. But we pretty much, to carry things in these first years, that's going to be the responsibilities of the two local governments, because there isn't a lot of revenue coming in from the state at this point until those investments grow, and they're growing very nicely. We've also mentioned that the city so far is funded up front. This is for the city council. They know that as well, of $15.8 million from other city sources. We're going to have to pay that back out of either bonding or cash flow over time. Some of those costs may be our capital costs for planning, the planning studies, and the Chateau Theater purchase would qualify as a capital cost that the state funds might be able to be used for. So that's kind of the list of key takeaways. I think in summary, my takeaways are the city and county are providing sufficient funding for the annual operating budget and planning costs, and that'll continue going on as we go forward. We can bond for $50 million if we need to. If you have projects coming up in the next couple of years, CIPs. We've discussed the abatement funds. We'll be taking that to the city council to see if they're fine with that. We do think you have to be mindful down the road that the transit costs may exceed $116 million. There's only $116 million designated in the legislation for transit, and that's the county match, which is 40% of the transit costs, and the state match in transit, which is 60%. So you have to keep mindful of the fact you may need some additional bonding capacity there and not try and use your bonding capacity up too fast. So using annual cash flow and kind of a pay-as-you-go approach as much as you can is very helpful. So I think the other comment I'd make is we're going to continue to refine our bonding scenarios. We've been in discussion with MMB. They'll have to sign on the bonds that are issued as well. The legislation required the city basically to issue all the bonds, some portion of which can be backed by state funding, as Kathleen was describing. The other portion will have to be backed by city revenues. Obviously, the county funds can back some transit bonding if we go that route. And so that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Great. So is Patrick getting, he's not, Pat, you don't have anything else, do you? No. Okay, great. So
Let me see if I could attempt to go to each of the boards around the table and just get your, nobody I realize is able to speak specifically for your board, but that's okay. Just get your reaction to this and your thoughts about, how we ought to work together to try to address what is, both sort of a huge opportunity, a cash flow management thing that we have to figure out, and then also how this shapes the way we want to think about the development before us and opportunities for partnerships as we figure out how to make this, these great resources that we have stretch as far as possible. And I don't know, maybe, does anybody want to start off with that?
Well,
I know in Minnesota we hate to talk about money, so that's why I specifically.
One
Councilmember
comment I would make, Madam Chair, just I think the city and the county is in a position where, as much as we would like to be forward-thinking and look at some of these opportunities, as Councilmember Wojciak touched on earlier, we have a significant obligation to what we already have and maintaining current infrastructure. So that is something that is always a challenge in front of us as we consider some of the new opportunities. How do we fund some of our other obligations that we already have on our plate? So just a comment.
Jim, put you on the spot a little bit from the perspective of the county. What's your sort of takeaway?
Well, my takeaway is, I think Gary did an excellent job. We're in a good position. We've been frugal as Minnesota, as we like to be frugal. We're frugal. We've got the money to do the first phase of the project. We need to continue to be frugal, but we're in a good place. As my takeaway is to continue to spur this private development, which will make the public money flow. I'm really on this transportation. We need to get the rules in place how we're going to have transportation downtown. The parking, whether we're going to have a monorail or circulator. So we need to keep pushing forward on that, realizing it's a big lift, and we need to think outside the box or create a new box or whatever we want to talk about. But I think the players are committed to do that. We just need to make sure that we keep the process moving forward and try not to get stuck in the mud so that we can, we got momentum on our side right now. We need to make that happen. We've got some great projects with the Discovery Square, the Alatis project down on 2nd Street, Center Place, Galleria, the Bloom project. There's a lot of momentum built here. I just don't want it. I don't want it to get bogged down. So I think transportation's kind of my focus at this point.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I can't really speak to the public financing, but I'll talk about Mayo's strategy as we've looked at this. You asked earlier, has DMC changed a mindset? And I would say for Mayo it has. As an example, I think historically we wouldn't have gone out with Discovery Square until we had the money in hand. But we saw an opportunity, and the way to really pursue that opportunity was through partnerships. And so we're establishing a partnership to bring dollars in to support an initiative that will support this Destination Medical Center initiative. The second thing is that these are long-term investments, and I think we have to use long-term financing in order to get dollars to invest. The public benefit from this is going to come through private investment that we have to incent in some ways by investing in infrastructure. The tax revenues that will be generated from new employment and businesses and real estate taxes will support a lot of the long-term financing. So I think you said it, partnerships and looking at this as long-term investments, probably as opposed to pay-as-you-go, may be an approach to consider.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, the return on investment here is tremendous. It's 10 to 1. But I also think that we have to remember that there's other revenue impacts that are also going to be benefiting the people of Rochester. For example, Minnesota is one of the first states where its Department of Health and Department of Transportation are working together. They realize transportation and health are intimately connected, right? So as we become America's city for health, in doing all of this work, we're not only going to spur development, we're going to improve the health of the people of Rochester, which reduce health care costs. We're going to have more people in the streets, which means crime goes down. We have less poverty because employment's there. And so there's a lot of other hidden revenue benefits and savings benefits on the social side that aren't even accounted for here. So the return on the investment of this transportation infrastructure is actually much larger than what we've actually seen here. And I just think we should just remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Earlier today, I asked, or I guess it was yesterday, I asked EDA and city staff about our capacity to capture and measure the return on investment, not the hidden costs, but the actual hard costs, and so that we can over time, which I think will be very important, actually really demonstrate it. And Lisa and Patrick or Matt, could you guys just respond to that question for this group?
Madam Chair, we are in the process of constructing our metrics dashboard, and I believe that will do a good job of tracking over time, and we're going back to 2012 to see the history of all those different pieces of the ROI and how the city, both from retail, hospitality, hotel, and housing, have grown and will grow.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Eska.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is like the first time that I've been able to actually work face-to-face with the EDA, and as we fund the budgets of the EDA between the city and the county, all of our budget dollars are scrutinized very closely and very tightly every year as we're accountable to the taxpayers, and as we fund your budgets, we trust that you are doing the same. A lot of us are looking at the expenditures and so on, and just to keep that in mind as we move forward with this is that, it's kind of a unique setup that we have here, but ultimately, we're all wanting to see the progress, but ultimately are accountable on all these dollars. So as you'll work through the budgets and prepare and agree on the contracts and that, just keep in mind that as you're moving forward. I think it's working well now, but we want to make sure that you are empowered to do these things, and we want to work together with you. So keep that in mind as we're moving forward, and that's some of the things that we're dealing with on an everyday basis. So
good, thank you. Any other comment? Oh yes, Mr. Campbell.
Well, I'd just like to underscore my feeling of the importance of moving forward with transportation. It's been mentioned several times around the table, but in addition to having a high-level plan to start to think about, I think one thing that it's not that the city and the county and the EDA hasn't worked all that much with the city and the county, but from the experience that I've had in transportation, everyone has to pull on the oars. Transportation is really hard work, and it takes time. So the sooner we can get some glimpse of a plan, what's going to happen is it's going to force all of us to work together as a team. And I remember going to talk to Steve Swigum about funding for the first light rail line. And Steve, being from just up the road, he said, well, I'm not going to support it because it's in the wrong place. And I had an enormous debate with Steve. It doesn't really matter where the first one is. It's the network of light rail that ultimately pays off. And RT is gone, but he and I argued about access off 35W on Lake Street for 20 years, and they're finally going to fix it. So the point is that we need to get started because and what's going to happen is that we're going to learn to play ball together as a team, because we're going to have to influence a lot of other people to ultimately get done what we want to do here. So my admonition is let's get going and let's get a plan together, and then we can start to get to work and get it done.
Thank you. Yeah, Nick.
So maybe to build off that sentiment, I think that's an important, again, for the staff to raise hands if they feel like there are decision points that need to be made by this kind of collective that's governing this. I think what we've seen today is there's a plan for building the plan. But I think if there's kind of those logical or high-level discussion points like we've started launching into today about, how do you move people 4 blocks outside of downtown? What is if we're prepared to, or if we need to have those discussions, or frankly, if they expedite some of the research that needs to be done to say, this isn't equitable for the city, we can make decisions like that. So I think, I think we look for hands to be raised too by some of the staff that are doing the day-to-day execution of this, that if there's a way to expedite something by coming back to, frankly, the taxpayers of Rochester and saying, is this something we'll support or not? I think that can also build a faster pipeline to maybe execute some of the plans that you're starting to get to. Let's not waste time exploring ideas that are not going to be feasible. We can have that quick discussion that says, if you say no cars downtown, yeah, that's going to be probably a showstopper. So I think how we move forward, I think let's look for those opportunities to maybe use the ladder and bypass a whole bunch of steps. That'd be appreciated.
Good, thank you. Well, I will just observe maybe also, is there anybody else have another comment on this? My observation is only that it's extremely helpful for us all to keep in mind how these dollars flow and the timing of them as well as the volume of them, and that it reinforces in me how important it is that we focus on where we should be putting these resources, because if we spread them out liberally in little drops and dribs all over the place, we are probably not going to see at the end of the day the kind of return on investment that we need. And this just helps to really reinforce that for me, for sure. Excellent. Then we're going to move to the last, with the permission of the group, we're going to move to our last agenda item. I'm not sure who's going to be presenting this last section. Just good for discussion. Okay. All right. So, colleagues, my only thought with this last bit of discussion is that each one of our boards has a very specific role, and yet we share accountability and responsibility for a very complex undertaking. And maybe the way of approaching this, I'm sure you all have had some opportunity to take a look at this. Maybe, and I'm putting people on the spot again, but it might be useful to just have each group, each board group, say a little bit about how you see your role and what help the other boards around the table could provide so that you can fulfill your role as well as you can. Why don't we try that for a discussion topic? And does anybody want to go first?
I'll do.
Thank you.
Well, again, I'm on the county commissioner, and I'm obviously the person on the DMCC board. And as I see it, we're committing money, dollars to the transportation, and we see ourselves as being a liaison between the city and the state. Mike Podolsky used to say that we're an ugly stepchild of the state. We get to do all the dirty work. So I don't know if that's exactly apropos, but that we see ourselves as a facilitator. I mean, we're in for some money. I mean, money makes the world go around. But we also see that we can be, again, a liaison between what the city and the state, and we have that push-pull going on. We also are intimately involved with the transportation study with Charlie Ryder and our other staff that are on there. So that's how we see our staff, and then to just lend general support to the project, because it's not just good for Olmsted County or City of Rochester, it's good for Olmsted County, and it's obviously great for the state of Minnesota. I mean, if we add 20,000 jobs in the next few years to the Mayo Clinic, that's got to have a good economic impact for the state of Minnesota besides the local economy. So that's how I see our role.
And would you say, Mr. Beer, that there's anything that the City Council or the DMCC or the EDA Board could do to help the county fulfill its role?
Just continue the way we've been. Lisa's been great. She invites our county board members in for updates and keeps them informed. Sometimes I miss some things. So it's good just if the EDA, we continue to have these dialogues offline where if there's questions, obviously other county board members may have different questions than I have, and just to keep their perspective on, and again, to work with our fellows and ladies at the city council, and we have good joint meetings, and we just keep our eye on the ball. I think it's going well right now. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, but I think things are good right now.
Could I turn to the city? And I also recognize that since our city colleagues on the DMCC board are sitting on this side, I haven't been looking to you enough to respond with the two hats that you wear. But maybe Council President Saver can kick it off.
I will start off and certainly look to my colleagues to chime in as well. I think, in my opinion, we are equal parts concerned not only with the policy setting, whether we're talking about transportation strategy or housing or any of those things, we're equally concerned about the execution and some of the details, the finer details that we are challenged with dealing with, whether it be zoning issues or incentive development or things of that nature. We're also challenged to look at the community on a broader scale and look further into the future. So when we talk about things like wastewater treatment or groundwater protection or things of those nature, we need to be cognizant of those factors as well. So again, I would just say that we are equal parts concerned not only with the policy and DMC and all the wonderful things we're trying to accomplish, but some of our other obligations as well.
Well, it's the opportunity to be both on this board and then having an office that's right up by our administrative people. It's a good situation to be able to, if I have a question of how is this going to affect the city and vice versa, and if they've got a thought that's by being on the same floor and being able to talk back and forth, why it's been very positive in that regard. And I would just say again, from my standpoint, and certainly I think certainly the council knows that our administrative staff and various departments, they work very, very, very hard on this and are spending a lot of time on it and are very dedicated to it. And so I'm very confident and comfortable with the fact of how much effort is being put in by the city to make sure that this whole initiative is going to be the success that I think we all think it will be. Good.
Yeah, Mr. Wojcik.
The short-term impacts in the city, obviously it does stress the finances quite a bit, and I think this made it clear that we're front-loading some of the financial considerations for DMC. And I think that it's important that we realize that every time we take a look at the rest of our network, our transportation network, and if we build roads that people are unable to cross to get to a bus stop or there's no safe access, we're digging ourselves further into a hole that's going to be harder to fix. And as we look at our community holistically too, each time we build a subdivision or development that requires perpetual subsidy from the taxpayers, that's going to take away from our ability to be fiscal stewards of what we're trying to do in the DMC district. So I think it's important that even these parts that are not in the DMC district, for all of these bodies, we consider what kind of community we're building and how we're going to be fiscally sustainable going forward.
I just, one of the things that our roles as city council members are leaders, but they're also representatives. And one of the things that I think that the city, as far as our roles as council members can help this body, is to be the eyes and the ears of the public. And what we're hearing, there's rarely a day I go by where I don't hear the DMC brought up in some conversation or in some manner of our talks. And so I think it's good that we keep an open dialogue and share information that we're hearing, sharing the feedback that the communities, whether it's different organizations or individual citizens, that we're making sure that we're sharing that with the group and using that to kind of help us as we move forward too. It seems like right now we're getting still a lot of questions. One of the things that we learned when we went to Cleveland and to Indianapolis was that those communities, to be successful, they all work together. They were all in the boat in the same direction. And I'm not sure that we're all quite there yet in our community. We still have people that are questioning, why are we doing this? What's in it for me? What is this really going to be a benefit and all that? And so I think we have to continually listen to people and figure out how to educate and to keep all the comments in mind and yet move forward. So I think that's part of our role too, as part of the big picture here.
Thank you. Members of the EDA board. Yes.
Well, I'll start, and other board members please chime in. But EDA is really the staff of the DMCC board, serving in partnership with city and county administration and other community organizations, really to execute the strategies that are established by the DMCC board, achieve the objectives and goals of the board. So we're here to serve.
Tom.
I'm new to the EDA board. I just want to say what a fabulous staff we have, as well as great leadership of our board. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But one point I wanted to make, I think of all the things on this list, one of the most important things for the future of the city is Discovery Square, because in a way that's the future economy of this city. And we have to get that right. And we have to get everything else right too, but that we have to absolutely get right. And as we look at the future of these innovation districts around the country, they're going to require some flexibility on the part of the city around zoning, around maybe even building codes, because a lot of these facilities are places where people are living, working, and making things frequently in the same building. They're kinds of facilities that we don't even know much about yet. And so I think that's a partnership that as Discovery Square evolves, working with the city to recognize that there's new kinds of economic activities and new kinds of zoning and building code challenges that we'll have to work through. But we do have to be flexible enough if we're going to compete with the San Franciscos and New Yorks of the world.
Yep. Yeah, Jim.
Just one last thing, and Ed, you reminded me of it. There's no reason for us to recreate the wheel here in Rochester. There are lots of people around the world that have already experienced a lot of this and be very successful. We're very concerned about our budgets, and we should be prudent in the way we spend our money. But I do think if it's appropriate to send our staff people or some of you to go someplace to see how someone has already done it, I think we should definitely make that a priority. We can do things a lot faster if we get on an airplane and go see what other people have done to produce success.
Well, maybe I can just close up this by saying that in my mind, the most important role of the DMCC board is really to be provide oversight and be a steward of the state resources. What's unique about this board is that we, of course, represent all of the stakeholders, and that means that together collectively we have an important role overseeing how everything else is happening. But I also feel that it's always important for this board to remember that the city, we put this together very carefully to make sure that the city retained its overall authority for what happens within the borders of the community. And I am always very, very respectful of that. I also am just noting, as we're all here together, that around this U-shaped table we have a tremendous amount of expertise in how the city of Rochester works, of course, not only within the area that we're most concerned with, but the entire community, how Olmsted County works. We have expertise here around development and healthcare and design and executing on big projects like the ballpark, and that we will all be well served if we figure out good ways of drawing on all of that expertise while also keeping in mind our individual roles. So with that, I'd like to ask if there are any closing comments or observations before we wrap this up. Okay. Great.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes.
I'd just like to say thank you for pulling this together for us, and hope that this will occur again. It makes us all feel very much connected, and I really appreciate that. I want to just give a shout out to the city and the county for the work that they have done to contribute to this with hardly any increase in staff, and that is just phenomenal and a tremendous commitment. So thank you all very much for that.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Could I just tag on?
Councilman Bereska.
I want to echo Sandra's point. I appreciate your strong leadership, Dina. This isn't an easy task, pulling all this together. And while we're doing what other communities have done, we're still kind of blazing our own trail. And it's not been without some challenges. And I miss working with you, so it's good to see you again, and appreciate all you've been doing.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, then I will officially move to adjourn this special meeting of the Destination Medical Center Corporation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? We stand adjourned, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to be with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.